So, Jim, we've been working together, 2 West and NAIA, in this partnership since I think the journey started in 2015 is when it kind of became official after this long courtship. And I remember you telling me at the time that for the last 70, 80 years, from a partnership, national partnership, to help, lift up the college's buying power and things, it was all athletic sponsorships, right? And the relationship you had with 2 West, which was completely unrelated to sports in any way, was new to you, right? And so I'm just curious, remembering the backstory on why and what you were trying to accomplish by doing that, because that was outside your normal footprint.
Yeah, I think the timing of when we met was fortuitous, because we were at a place in our history where I personally, but the association, was developing much deeper relationships with presidents of institutions. They were getting much more involved in athletics, and they also were coming to us with a lot of issues and challenges outside of athletics. And so, as you said, previous to, I would say, 2010-ish range, we were just in our lane of athletics, and we were trying to figure out how to help the athletic department. But it was becoming much more obvious that athletics, especially at small schools, touch so many other parts of campus. And so we were looking for places to say, how can we help them financially? How can we help them drive enrollment? How can we help them to do other things with capital projects, things like that? And so when you started talking about retirement plans and how there was so much room to help institutions, especially small ones like are in the NAIA, kind of a light bulb went off, and I said, let's think about this. Let's talk about it. Let's see what might be possible. And then you and I started visiting, and now it's led us to a multiple employer plan. We've created such a great relationship with 2 West, and I think lots of things are possible down the road.
I look back at the journey, kind of the evolution, right? And it was back in about 2015, you put me in front of the Council of Presidents, which scared me, right? You remember that? And I remember kind of casting a vision about aggregating for buying power, right? Because I looked at the footprint, and you're right, a lot of these are small, private, liberal schools with very minimal dollars in their retirement plans. And when I say minimal, 15, 5, 20, 30, 50, 80 million dollars. A lot of money, but minimal to the financial services industry. And I kind of cast a vision about what if we came together for buying power, right? And so for the first year and a half or so, I remember going around, you were inviting me to all these conference council of presidents, and I was just flying around talking to different presidential conferences at their conference level and casting the vision. And then folks would start kind of saying, hey, I like the idea. You start kind of pulling in some information to do case studies, right? I needed to provide evidence back to the council that this could potentially work.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I noticed was every single one of these schools were identical. They were in mostly rural areas, understaffed, under-budgeted, with the exact same record keeper, which in this case was primarily TIAA, and the exact same experience from a service standpoint and the exact same experience from a fee standpoint, right? And I remember coming back to you and I'm like, Jim, I think we could pull this off.
Yeah, and I think a credit to you and to the good folks at 2 West is you didn't push too hard. I mean, this is higher ed. Things don't go real fast. I think most would admit are in higher ed. So you did that tour, if you will. You went out for a year and a half, 2 years to really just explain to people what the benefits were. And you were patient, and you didn't try to force them in to do anything before they were ready. But as the idea started to grow and as people started to realize how much they could save, what better service they would get, how much pressure or burden they could take off of their own staff, we started to see people join, and now we're kind of at a place where I think we're going to be able to really take off in this next year or two. And so I'd be interested to hear from you kind of where we are and sort of how you're thinking about things coming out of COVID and just what's next.
Yeah, so fast forward, we formalized it with the formal RFP for vendors, right? We had to find our auditors for where that applies, our third-party fiduciary administrators, which is TAG Resources, and then our record keeper, which Tia ended up winning the business. So we kind of put the band together and who the players are that are going to support this program. And it's funny because it really revolves around the money. You know, like Harvard has all the money and Yale has all the money and they get all the good stuff. That's just how it worked. But now we're able to compete with those types of services and get the attention of the vendor community and our partners to get all the things that the big colleges and universities would get. So we're up to Currently, 2 West has about 30 different institutions under the care, custody, and control of our fiduciary watch. There are roughly about 18 in the program today, and the rest are kind of on their way in, right, because of timing, right? There's turnover, there's COVID, there's pandemics, there's all kinds of stuff, and you're right, higher ed moves a lot slower than what I was used to coming from the private sector, right? They just make decisions fairly quick and we move on. So, yeah, and I would call almost, I remember talking to Arvid Johnson, he asked me a pointed question before we got started, and he's like, Rink, what's escape velocity, right? Where is it to where we're at that point to where this thing's launched and ready to go? And during our recent meeting with the Board of Trustees, I said, I think we're there. The answer was 30, and we're just about there. And then now as we're up and running, it was interesting because when nobody wanted to be first. Nobody wanted to be first. So that was interesting. Everybody wanted in, but everybody was scared to go first. And I don't blame them, and they were right. But now as you start circling, back, the word's gotten out. I mean, we're all over. We've got 3 institutions in Oregon now. We're in Kentucky. We've got the Dakotas covered. We're all over the Great Plains and the heart of America. Purposefully, I remember when we were building the structure of it, we purposely wanted to not just limit this to NAIA schools. And that was a decision made by the council and you and I, and there was a reason for it. And I was going to ask you kind of what your thoughts were on that, because this is really open to all higher ed. It's more of a holistic type of approach. Private K-12, NCAA small schools are in it, taking a look at it. So what was the design behind that, of expanding it beyond just the NAIA?
Yeah, I don't think it was really a slam dunk decision. I mean, we talked about it a lot, because in some ways you say, well, excuse me, you might want to have this as a benefit to NAIA members only. And so to have a club and you bring them in and this is something different as members. But as we talk more about it, I think we decided, if there are small schools out there who need this, we should reach out to all of them. And maybe a byproduct of that will be, as some of them see the different ways that the NAIA approaches things and the ways that we're trying to help schools that our competitors aren't, it might interest them in joining us down the road. And the way we've structured it, we can make a little bit of money in the meantime by bringing in some of these other schools. So I think, again, to your credit, you've not only brought in other colleges and universities, but some K through 12 and some other organizations that, as long as they are willing to come in and operate like everybody else, they're a good fit.
People are asking me kind of what the benefit is, why would I do it? And when we're talking to institutions, it's really, we're trying to solve for 3 things. Can we reduce cost? Not just cost to the plan participants, but can we reduce hard dollar cost to the institutions? Can we outsource fiduciary liability to the fullest extent, right? Can we support in that? And then the third one, which everybody really asks about, is can you support my staff? Can you basically be an extension of another staff member for me? Because my staff is under budgeted, we wear a lot of hats, throw the pandemic in, nobody has time for this, right? And so when we're talking to people, it's almost like some people get 3 bites at the apple, some people 2, some people 1, some people none. Everybody kind of gets excited for their own reasons. But for most of all of our footprint that we serve, who we're trying to attract, that smaller institution, most of the time they see the benefit. And then you had asked me about the pandemic, right? We had a lot of momentum coming out of 19. It was a good year, and 2020 comes rolling around. And so right around March or April is when the whole world basically shut down, including everything that we were doing with transitioning institutions into the program. It just came to a screeching halt. Now, 2 West, when I look back, we were really fortunate. We did 2 things in 2019 purposefully because we knew this now. We got lucky. We got lucky. In 2019, our director of ops flat out said, we're getting rid of all hard phone calls. We're going straight to Zoom, right? So we had a year of practice of Zoom prior to, and then we went paperless. So when we had to start figuring out, right, so we sent our staff home overnight. They popped up, we were up and running, but our colleges weren't. But if you fast forward, May, things started opening up. June, we started transitioning more institutions back in. And I think it was because everybody kind of got used to this new way of communication. Faculty, staff, all the one-on-ones, plus the, the CFOs and the presidents and HR, the committee members, they just got so used to it that we just started popping up Zoom meetings, doing one-on. We did 1,600 one-on-ones on Zoom for our colleges and universities. So, and they've grounded us. Still, all of them have said, "We'll see you in 22." Right? And you're dealing with that. We can't get back on campus.
Yeah, and I think the relationships you had already built, I'm sure helped with those, to continue those with the Zoom calls as opposed to doing that from scratch. And I think it will be great once we can get back out in person, because that tour that you alluded to earlier that you and I did, I mean, you did more than I did, but I thought there were some of those conferences with you. It really helped them to understand and build a trust with you that you're in it for the right reasons. And so I look forward to getting back to that.
Well, it's easy to ride for the brand because all eyes are looking at me because presidents talk. It's a very small community.
Welcome to my world.
Yeah, no, thank you. I'm already in it to a degree, but I like the arm's length because when you do something well, people talk about it. When you do something poor, people will talk about it. So it's almost like we would do this naturally anyway, but it's just different than the private sector because it's just higher ed's so much closer, right?
Yeah, and I think that makes me think of, this might be a strange tie-in, but the things that we're doing with 2 West, and we've done other things like I mentioned, the esports, I think has really helped as we've tried to get our presidents and leaders to think about COVID in a different way. The NCAA, their first reaction is just shut everything down. And our first priority is to keep our student athletes safe, but at the same time, we know that athletics and getting those students on the campus is really vital to all of our members, but to some, it's the difference between staying open and closing down. So from the start, we said, we want to figure out a way to say yes as opposed to shutting it down. And I think some of these ventures outside of traditional athletics where we've said, look, this is something we want you to think about that maybe you wouldn't associate with NAIA previously, has gotten them to trust in us to be able to think differently, but have a lot of good thought, intentionality, and strategy behind it for execution. And so while 2 West and what we're doing with you guys is way different than the things we're tackling with COVID, I just think the more things that we did previous to COVID that gave them confidence in us was a big deal. And 2 West in this partnership was certainly one of them.
Yeah, so you talk about thinking outside the box and doing some different things. In the October Council of Presidents meeting, I got permission to kind of talk about some of the things that are on the horizon, right? So we just launched Goal Path, which is a full-blown financial wellness program to the NAI, right? So not only do you have all these benefits of the program, it comes with a full-blown financial wellness program with the best technology and then private certified financial planning coaches who can help navigate things like student debt, right? Credit card debt, paycheck to paycheck. I'm talking about basic needs. And then there's advanced things too, but that is obviously a hot topic in the industry. And education being very paternalistic tends to gravitate toward that more. That ties into, and this was funny, in October at the council, 5 years ago we built custom portfolios, custom target date funds that had guaranteed income for life in them. And they've been great. Morningstar just came out and ranked the one that's the closest to retirement, which is the one we're protecting the most, our 2020 series. Out of the entire category of target date funds, first quartile, third percentile. For the pandemic.
That's competing against the big boys.
That's competing against every single target date fund that's available. First quartile, third percentile during the pandemic. And that speaks going back to, we've been doing that for 5 years, right? And that's kind of fun to play against the big boys because the cool thing is that I told the council was that those custom portfolios, we were the first advisory firm along with you to launch those in the country. A couple other have followed, right? And then I think I mentioned that Yale announced in 2020, Jim, and we've been doing this with you since 2015, Yale announced that they're going to go ahead and launch the exact same thing we've been doing for 5 years. And I'm just finally, I'm like,
most people think those Yale folks are pretty smart.
Yeah, but apparently, you know what? Copycat is the most, wonderful form of flattery. And so I just like the fact when I look at that kind of announcement come out and the innovative things we're doing, the smalls are getting a better deal than any of those bigs right now from all those different resources, right?
Congratulations to you guys on that. And that, it's good for us to hear that because when we got into business together, you were trusting in us that we could help deliver and get you, connected with schools and engaged and help bring some schools along. And we were trusting in you that you were going to deliver, that this really was a program that not only would, save cost and take burdens away and all those things, but that, that we knew that we were in good hands on the investment side. And that certainly backs that up.
And then you talked about COVID. COVID creates creativity, right? You have to pivot a lot during, I'm talking about the heavy part last year and still to this point. And you and I spent a lot of time, we went down the road of helping with testing at one point, right? Just pulling in all my resources, right? And then it got to the point where I got permission, and you and I talked about it throughout many times with our good friend Jamie Linkowski. And, the next thing that we're working on is a partnership with Johns Hopkins University that is brought to us. That's a very unique relationship that we kind of launched at the Council of Presidents. And a few of them have kind of glommed on. Now, this is a longer build, but long term, when you think about outside athletics and things that we could do to help financially, and Matt Lindsay, who's on our board, who's the Kansas Independent College Association's CEO, president, is part of this. But it's what if we could build a giant procurement center to where it's different than the group purchasing organizations that they're used to where we could create our own marketplace, right? To where all these small schools could come together, get on a website, go shop for whatever things that they need at like massive discount prices that they'll ever get on their own because we're partnering with people like Johns Hopkins for buying power, right? That we talked about, that's fun. It's a longer build out.
Yeah.
But when you think about things like that or creating captive healthcare situations, right? Those are the types of things that when I get off on my visionary stuff that are fun to think about because they can make a big impact.
Yeah, they are. And the procurement one, it just seems like a no-brainer. When you get into it, you've got schools have been buying from the same people forever, so you got to get people to change their habits or what they're doing. But I feel like we've talked about it enough where I think you agree. If we can just get the first few folks in and get them to have a good experience, which I know they will, if we partner with Johns Hopkins and having a lot of the buying power that we'll have, I think it'll take off in a hurry. So it's just a matter of how do we get it launched and get it moving. But I think it'll be great.
It's funny, I think about the Field of Dreams movie up in Iowa. If you build it, they will come. That is so not true. I thought that let's just build it and pop it up and people are going to walk in the door. It's not how it works, man.
Yeah.
We had to go out, bootstrap it, find 5, 6, 7 champions,
Yeah.
prove that it worked,
Right.
so that all the people that were excited about it, that are just watching, could then slowly start walking in the door, right?
Well, it's a nice concept. Build it and they will come. I agree.
But they don't.
It doesn't work in reality.
No.
All the restaurants that go out of business. But.
Yep, and it's the same concept with the procurement, or if we're going to do the healthcare captive and see, we've got to go out and do the work just like we did, find 5, 6 case studies, see if there's even evidence to support it. Because if there's not, I don't want to mess with it, right? Find out if there's an appetite, and then come back to the council and say, here's what we found, right? And that's kind of how we did the retirement plan. Then the council's like, that's got legs, let's move forward, and then the rest is history.
Yeah, but the good news is we have an audience willing to listen and we built some trust with, so I feel good about the next big thing we take to them, and you whet their appetite in October, and I think we'll have another conversation in May, and hopefully at that point things are going to be loosening up in terms of COVID and where people are, and we can start to get those champions in for that procurement idea, and I think it'll move pretty good.
It's fun not being a stranger in the room anymore. I've built 5 years of trust. I've executed on everything I said. We've got raving fans. I do everything that I'm supposed to be doing. So I've got a little bit of, I feel like when I'm telling a new idea, it's not like some wacky guy off the street that nobody knows.
Right.
It's like, oh, it's Rink again. He's back with more.
And you just come in and you're yourself, and they know you, and it's all good.
So, and then I will say thanks to our partners in TIAA. TIAA has really gotten behind this. This year they announced to put some full-blown resources. They gave all of our clients dedicated relationship managers. So we've got one team that represents all of the program. Instead of having 5 different people, you gotta, it's like herding cats, right? They put a ton of resources around supporting MEPs or multiple employer aggregation programs. So TIA has shifted, and they're really putting a dedicated team to growing it and then putting assets into it on some of the institutions that they think may be a good fit. And then TAG Resources has been great. They're the administrative fiduciary. And that relationship has been great. Martha Payton does a good job, and then Culture and Justice, as far as the audits. And it's funny, everybody says you should lead with this, and I always forget. Our audits typically are going to start off at less than $5,000. When you go run around and talk to these large institutions that are paying for audits, they're not $5,000. They're not even close. So when the institution hears that as the benefit, I kind of forget about it.
Right.
But so.
In our schools, if they can save 10 or 15 grand on an audit, that's a big deal.
Redirect that somewhere else toward the mission,